back on record. The time is 3:46 p.m.
Mr. Belmont, I'm going to be handing you what I've marked as Exhibit 5. Yeah. All right, for the record, Exhibit 5 is PB/PTB 178 through 181. Mr. Belmont, have you had a chance to review this document? Or
Briefly,
these
yes.
documents? Okay. Do you generally recognize them as emails?
Yes.
Emails that were produced by either you personally or by Preserve the Burg within this litigation?
Yes.
I'd like to focus on the first page. It's an email from you to Jim Stitt dated Tuesday, December 18th, 2018, 2:44 p.m. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
Okay. And do you see the last paragraph of that first email? It starts with, Howard has decided to defer further work. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
Howard has decided, and I'm quoting, Howard has decided to defer further work on updating the application until we have a better feel for how this is going to move forward and determine what, if any, additional information Lord Duvacot with the city may need or desire. Did I read that accurately?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if you or anyone from Preserve the Burg ended up providing further information to Lord Duvacot or anyone else from the city regarding the application?
I do not believe either I did not, and I do not believe any other information was provided by Preserve the Burg to supplement the application.
And not just in supplementing the application, any information whatsoever regarding the application? Nothing was provided to Ms. Duvacot regarding the application by either you or Preserve the Burg?
I don't believe so. Again, we commented at the public hearings, but I don't believe that we submitted any information otherwise.
I'd like to focus on the last page of Exhibit 5. And that's bait stamped as 181. Do you see where I'm at? Do you see where I'm at? Okay.
Well, I'm on 181, yes.
Okay. Did you see how these emails generally read chronologically from top to bottom? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. And I'd like to focus on the first email, Wednesday, December 26, 2018 at 5:16 p.m. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
That's an email from you, Peter Belmont, to Ann Dowling-Hess.
Correct.
All right. And I'd like to focus on the second full paragraph of that email. You write to Ms. Dowling, quote, please let me know if you want to be a part of the call, which would include the city, attorney I've been speaking with who represents property owner, and myself, and yourself if you desire, period. If you are not going to join the call, comma, please confirm I can agree on your behalf to continue the hearing to either February or March, period. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Now, other than the response that appears below, which appears as an email from Ms. Dowling back to you, did Ms. Dowling ever communicate to you through any other medium as to her desire to be on this forthcoming call or not?
I don't believe she did.
So, from your recollection, her response to you is only the following email that appears below?
Yes, I would say in part the reason for that message was she had indicated in some form, which I think is prior to this, that she was going to be out of town over the holiday period. And so that was in part why I sent Ann that message and raised that question, is because it appeared that otherwise the other parties who were going to be telephone call participants would be available, and based upon Ann saying she would be away over the holidays, that she may not be available.
Okay. Do you see Ms. Dowling's response below, Wednesday, December 26, 2018 at 7:01 p.m.? Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
And in it, she writes, quote, you may agree to continue period. We are traveling, period. If I am free, I will try to make the call, period. Thank you for all you are doing, exclamation point. Anne. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So based off of that message, did Anne agree that you could communicate her consent to a continuance via this email?
Again, you would have to ask Ann, but my understanding was that Ann had no objection to the hearing being on a date beyond January.
And did you communicate Anne's agreement with a continuance to the city of St. Petersburg as well as the King's attorney on that phone call?
When Ann did not end up making the call, I did advise the other parties that Ann had indicated to me that she would not object to a hearing date other than the January hearing date.
And then my only other question regarding this document, do you see down below an email, Peter Belmont to Howard Ross, you see how it says, quote, text hidden? Do you see that?
Yes.
You see how that appears as well above Ms. Dowling's signature line on the Wednesday, December 26, 2018, 7:01 p.m. email? Do you see that?
I see the quoted text hidden. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. Do you know what that text is that was hidden from this document?
I believe it's part of what's in here. I mean, so again, these are ongoing series of email messages, and so again, when you have a string of messages, sometimes the other messages in the string are included, and sometimes they're not.
And is this one of those circumstances where you can actually click, if this was a digital document, you could click on that quoted text hidden and actually be able to expand the full message?
I believe so.
Is that something that you could look into and provide to your counsel in terms of the full text of this communication?
I should be able to.
Okay. If you do look into that, and it is something that is responsive, you think that you could produce that to your counsel so it could ultimately be produced to the plaintiffs?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And what is marked Exhibit 6. For the record, Exhibit 6 is PB/PTB 00062. Mr. Belmont, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Okay. And generally, what is this?
It is a message from me email message from me to Emily Owen.
And this email's dated December 28th, 2018, 11:01 a.m., is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and I'd like to focus on the last line of the email from you to Ms. Elwin. And it starts with, and I quote, Anne has authorized me to agree to continue if she is not on the call, period. Is that, did I read that accurately?
Yes.
Okay, now is this the authority to agree to a continuance that we discussed in exhibit number 5, I believe?
It is. The phone call, one of the purposes of having everyone who was potentially involved on the phone call was that I believe everyone agreed that if a compromise was going to be achieved, then it would be necessary to continue the January hearing date. And when I say everyone involved, as I indicated earlier, I initiated the discussion of a compromise with Jake Kramer without having ever discussed it with Ann Dowling. And again, to the extent that Ann had indicated she may or may not be able to make the phone call. I'd asked Ann, as reflected in the previous email, whether she would have any objection to the hearing being rescheduled to another date. As we have seen, she did not have an objection, and she was not on the phone call. And so, again, this reference in the message is to that series of events, and my passing on Ann's message that she would not object to a change in hearing dates.
And you passed that message on to, if I recall, members from the city of St. Petersburg as well as Jake Kramer, right?
I passed that on in the phone call that included Jake on the phone call and included Laura and Derek in the phone call.
And Laura and Derek being Laura Duvacott and Derek Kilborn from the city of St. Petersburg, right?
Correct. And I believe in that phone call as well, I indicated that I was representing Preserve the Burg, and while I was passing that message on, that Preserve the Burg was the party that I was representing.
Handing you what I marked as Exhibit 7. And for the record, Exhibit 7 is PB/PTB 00044. Mr. Belmont, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is this document?
Copies of text messages.
And at the top, you see to Peter Belmont. Am I
Correct.
correct? Who is the other party on this text message thread?
I believe it's Emily Elwin.
I'd like to focus on the third text message from the bottom. Do you see where I'm reading from? It starts with, working on that now, dash, may be worth waiting to reach out to Nickens when we have new ED, question mark. Do you see where I'm reading?
Yes.
Okay, my question is, who is Nickens?
He is with the Tampa Bay Times.
And who was it that was going to reach out to the Tampa Bay Times? Or Mr. Nickens, I should say.
One of us was Preserve the Burg.
Do you have, is that something that Preserve the Burg typically does? Reaching out to the Tampa Bay Times regarding a recently filed application?
Again, depends on circumstances. We don't always.
Is that a means by which Preserve the Burg likes to spread the word about potential historic designation applications?
I'm not sure how I would best describe it. I mean, I think generally we feel that the more that can be published in the newspaper about historic preservation issues, the more that educates the public about those matters.
I see at the end of that text that I read a moment ago, ED. Is that an acronym for something? What is ED?
Executive Director. So again, we talked about earlier this morning, Preserve the Burg was during this year transitioning from Allison into another Executive Director.
Do you know if Preserve the Burg ended up reaching out to the Tampa Bay Times regarding the application that was filed for the Doc Webb House?
I don't believe we ever reached out in the sense of initiating any contact. I don't recall whether Susan Taylor Martin had called us regarding the application or not. And I don't recall without looking whether or not Emily was quoted in one of those articles. I want to say she was, but I don't recall without looking at them.
Did you speak with Susan Taylor Martin? And when I say you speak with her, did you speak with her about the Doc Webb application?
I don't believe that I did. Well, let me take that back. I think there are some other email messages, but that there was an article, and there was some, I think there, whether it was by email or telephone, I think I'd asked Susan if we'd wanted to, was an opportunity for us to try and offer comment. So there was at least communication to that extent. I don't remember any other communication. And I don't remember if we were questioned after either the commission or city council took their votes. Again, it's not particularly unusual if there's going to be a news story in which we testified at regarding an application that the reporter might ask us for comment.
But you'd agree with me that these text messages are on December 29th, 2018, right?
That's the date that's displayed, so yes.
So that would have been before any testimony was provided to the CPPC or City Council, right?
It would have been, but there was, again, without going back and looking at the date, there was a large newspaper article, if I recall correctly, the end of December, but there was a large newspaper article about Doc Webb that had appeared in the newspaper.
So this would be, this series of text messages would be in reference to reaching out to the TBT in regards to either the writing of that article or that article had been recently published and not about testimony that was given at a City Council or CPPC hearing. Is that what you're saying?
To the extent that there had been the article, it appeared that the Times had some interest in the issue, and so they therefore may be writing additional stories concerning it.
Andrew, what I've marked as Exhibit 8. Yeah. All right, for the record, Exhibit 8 is PB-PTB 00043. Mr. Belmont, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Okay. And does this appear to be text messages?
Yes.
And again, you appear at the top, Peter Belmont. My question is, who is this text message thread between besides yourself?
I believe Emily Allen, and if this helps, we haven't gotten Emily to correct my name spelling on her text messaging, so it has a double L, which gives you a hint that it is
It's
Emily.
me. That's how you know it's me.
Okay, I'd like to focus on, and hopefully you can work with me here, we can breeze through this, on the third to last text message. I'm reading, it says, "For FB post dash have comments go to mayor question mark." Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, is that a message, is that your text or is that Miss Elwin's text?
That was Ms. Elwin's.
Okay, and she's referencing speaking with who? Is that Mayor Kreisman?
At least to the extent have comments go to mayor would be in reference to Mayor Kreisman's office.
And what does that mean for Facebook post, have comments go to mayor? Does that mean sending the Facebook post comments to Mayor Kreisman, or what does that mean?
I believe what that meant was that there was contemplation that there was going to be another posting on the Preserve the Berg Facebook page about the Doc Webb property, and that there would be some suggestion for, again, the public to send in comments regarding the property. And so the question is, where should those comments be addressed or sent to?
So unpacking that, is this a discussion between you and Ms. Elwin as to let's create a Facebook post in which we ask the public to reach out to Mayor Kreisman? Is that a general way to read this, what's being discussed here?
Well, as you can see above that, there's a question. Essentially, it's if we assume for the moment that there's going to be a post that goes up, and included within that post is going to be a request or suggestion for public comment, it's about where should that public comment be directed? So there's reference to the mayor, there's reference to Derek or Laura, which would be Derek Kilborn or Laura Dulico.
Okay. Do you know if ultimately Preserve the Burg had a Facebook post that directed comments to Mayor Kreisman regarding the Doc Web application?
Again, let me ask for clarification regarding the post that is being discussed here, or at any time during the, at any time related to the Doc Web property.
Let's start with the post that's being discussed here, and then we can talk about at any time.
I'm not sure if they were directed to the mayor in addition to other parties or not.
What about at any time?
It's actually the same answer. I'm
Same
not
answer.
sure if they were directed to the mayor as well as other parties. Typically, if the matter is going before the commission, messages are directed to preservation staff to deliver to commission members. If it is a matter that's going to city council, typically those matters would be addressed to city council offices and sometimes as well to the mayor.
Let me hand you Exhibit 9. For the record, Exhibit 9 is PB/PTB 00183 and 184. Mr. Belmont, do you recognize these documents?
Yes.
And generally, what are these documents?
Emails between myself and Natalie DiVincente.
And Miss DiVincente, that was the realtor that you discussed earlier this morning in the other deposition, is that right?
Correct.
I'd like to focus on the first email on page 1, Monday, December 31st, 2018, 9 a.m., from you to Miss DiVincente. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's the third sentence in this email, and I quote, "While David Weekly has a contract on the property, there may be some potential interest for alternative buyers, period." Do you see where I read?
Yes.
Okay, and this, again, is December 31st. And in this email, you're acknowledging that you have knowledge that David Weekly has a contract on the property. Is that accurate?
I'm acknowledging that Jake Kramer had indicated or told me in our earlier phone conversations that there was a contract with David Weekly and that they also had a potential interest in other buyers for at least portions of the property.
And is that phone call that we discussed a little while ago that was sometime around December 18th?
That would be, I don't recall whether or not there would have been a subsequent phone call between that one and this email, but it does include that phone call. I believe there were subsequent communications between that very first contact and this message.
I'd like to focus on the following page, date stamped 184. Email from you to Miss DiVincente, Thursday, January 3, 2019, 10:31 p.m. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
All right, and then it's a somewhat lengthy email. You provide Jake Kramer's contact information in the middle of the body. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
And then I'd like to focus on the paragraph that immediately follows Mr. Kramer's contact information. Can you read that paragraph for me?
For whatever it's worth, so far Jake has been very pleasant and cooperative to work with. I've had a couple calls with him. I'm going to guess, though you may know better, that potentially the property sold to two separate buyers could bring more than selling entire parcel to David Weekly. To my knowledge, property has not been marketed. Weekly bought a parcel down the street, and my guess is knowing the Doc Webb property could fit several new homes, and the home looks a bit run down, inquired and found a willing seller. If that's the case, Weekly may also have gotten a pretty good deal.
You say a pretty good deal. What is it specifically that you mean by a pretty good deal?
That he may have been able to purchase it at a price that was less than what others may have been willing to offer.
And by less than what others may be willing to offer, is that generally less than market value? Is that what you mean by a good deal?
No, I had no idea what market value was for the property.
And so I guess in terms of pretty good deal, you mean because the property never had to hit the MLS or the market and it was sold privately, you think that there might have been a good sales price offered to David Weekly? Is that what you mean by good deal?
Essentially, again, I'm making quite a number of suppositions that are reflected in the message, and ultimately saying that Natalie is a real estate person and would have a better idea as to what the value of that property is. I'm making some guesses and suppositions about it otherwise. I would also say that the reason why there's no price reflected in here, why I'm making some guess that Weekly may have gotten a pretty good deal, I had no idea what Weekly was paying and what was in the contract.
All right, the next paragraph, and for the interest of time, I'll just read it. You see, if any, or if other questions, do you see that next paragraph?
Yes.
And a short ways down it says, Ann Dowling supposedly has some interest in purchasing the property, comma, she lives behind it, period. You see where I'm reading?
Yes.
And again, the date of this email is January 3rd, 2019, 10:31 p.m. So is it fair to say that at some time before January 3, Ann Dowling expressed to you her interest in some capacity of purchasing the Doc Webb property?
From the message, I would assume that there was some indication that she had an interest, and I don't know, I don't recall how that was expressed. I don't recall how it was expressed in the sense of whether at that time she was indicating her interest was in the entire parcel or some portion of the parcel.
Do you know if that interest was expressed to you in December of 2018?
I can't say for sure. I had very little contact with Ann in December of 2018, so I had very little contact, you know, a couple days later into January. Do
you remember speaking with her on New Year's Day, 2019?
I don't recall in particular when I spoke with her. I did not speak with Ann very much. You know, again, I'm taking speaking for the moment in the sense of talking as compared to emailing or texting. So again, I do not recall in particular what or how she expressed her interest, and to tell you the truth, at that stage it was not of particular importance to me. What was more important to me was that Jake Kramer, on behalf of the Kings, had indicated an interest in pursuing what I felt could be a solution to the issue, and the issue again being, is there a way to find a compromise solution that could have a consensus agreement to achieve landmark designation.
Below that last paragraph we were just discussing, you see where it says quoted text hidden again? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that something you can look into as to whether or not that quoted text is responsive to our request for production and was just inadvertently omitted from this document?
I don't think anything was inadvertently omitted to my knowledge. Again, I think it's the string of messages, and we see that on a number of occasions. So another example on 00183 at the bottom of the page is Natalie's message back to me. It says quoted text hidden, and I believe that's my message to her.
Okay. And my question, very simple, is that something you can look into and determine whether or not that hidden text was inadvertently removed?
we should be able to look at it and see if it is what I am saying or something different.
Okay, thank you. Handing you Exhibit 10. For the record, Exhibit 10 is PB/PTB 00193. Mr. Belmont, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
All right. What is it?
An email from myself to Jim Stitt and Ann Dowling.
And it's dated Sunday, January 27th, 2019, 11:54 a.m. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. And the email starts with, "My understanding of where things stand." Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
And go ahead and take a read of that first paragraph. You don't have to read it into the record. And let me know once you've read it.
All right.
All right, and generally you're talking about a price of the King's home based on linear frontage foot. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. And you end with, "You now have an idea of the price being requested." Do you see where I'm reading?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that idea and what did you mean by that statement?
That price that is being referenced as far as linear frontage foot was a price that had been provided by Jake Kramer in an email message. And so that's what it's in reference to.
Do you remember if you did the math as to what that price would be?
I did not.
So you couldn't tell me whether that equation would add up to the not less than $750,000 offer that Ann Dowling ultimately made on February 21st?
Form objection.
That's correct. I couldn't tell you. And again, as far as I was concerned, it wasn't particularly significant to me. Again, I had no idea what David Weekly was offering for the property, so at least I don't know how at least $750,000 would have compared to the Weekly offer. And I also assumed that if Ann was going to purchase the property and continued to have an interest in purchasing the property, that was something for her to work out with Mr. Kramer, and it was not a matter that I was either planning on or intending to be involved with.
Going back to the beginning of the email, you start with, "My understanding of where things stand." Am I reading that right?
Yes.
Okay, what is that understanding based on?
Communications with Mr. Kramer.
Anybody else in terms of the communications?
I don't believe really for the purpose of this message. I mean, again, as we've discussed, there had been telephone calls that involved the city, that I've had messages or communications with Emily Ellen, but this is primarily concerning what Mr. Kramer and I have discussed. And I don't also know when Ms. Dowling started communicating directly with Mr. Kramer. So I'm not aware to what extent, if any, Ms. Dowling has been communicating with him at that stage.
I hand you Exhibit 11. And for the record, Exhibit 11 is PB/PTB 00202, 203, and 204. Mr. Belmont, do you recognize these documents?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to focus on the second page, which is marked 203 with the bait stamp. I'd like to focus about in the middle, email between you, Peter Belmont, and Jim Stitt, dated February 13, 2019, 10:04 a.m. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
Right, and I'm going to read from the third sentence here. And I quote, I believe the attorney understands that selling to Ann in the long run is easier than getting bogged down with landmarking issues, end quote. Did I read that correctly?
It sounds like you did. I'm just trying to catch up where you are. Yes.
Which email are you on?
Wednesday, February 13th, 2019, 10:04 a.m., Peter Belmont to Jim Stitt. Starts with Jim, ellipses.
Okay.
Third
You're reading in the middle of it?
Third sentence.
Okay.
You see where I am, Mr. Belmont?
Yes.
Okay. And you say here the attorney. Is that in reference to Jake Kramer?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you mean by this statement?
Anne had indicated in the phone call, which I believe was at the end of January, her interest in purchasing the property. In the phone call that involved Mr. Kramer, city staff, and that I was part of. And so, again, what I mean is that what would appear to be relatively simple solution from some perspectives, somebody purchasing the property, and presumably at a fair price, would then eliminate any further issues about should a landmark application be supported by the Kings or not. So that seemed like, in some ways, to me, a relatively simple way to resolve the matter. And so that is essentially what I am expressing. And I obviously am expressing that I believe that Mr. Kramer would understand that selling to another purchaser would also resolve those issues for the Kings.
So essentially, selling to Ann would be easier than the Kings having to go through a historical designation process. Is that what you mean?
I guess not necessarily. I'm just saying that I think that somebody else, whether it's Ann or anybody else, but to the extent that Ann had expressed an interest, that somebody else purchasing the property would then, if you want to say, end the Kings' obviously ongoing ownership of the property and issues as to whether or not they were going to be supporting or not supporting landmark designation.
You use the word bogged. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by bogged down with landmarking issues?
Anne in her phone call had indicated that she was going to be making an offer in a relatively short period of time, far shorter than what the schedule was for the landmark designation proceedings. And so it seemed to me that, as I have indicated, that that would provide, in some ways, what I'm considering a relatively straightforward and simple solution to the Kings and issues about landmarking. Clearly, in my mind at least, a hearing there where there is not a consensus about the application involves a disputed matter before the Preservation Commission, potentially, and City Council, and that I don't think it's necessarily a process that would need to be followed if there was another way that could be achieve the goals for the parties, and I'm assuming the primary goal for the Kings was to sell the property.
So essentially what you're saying by bogged down is that by selling to Ann or someone else, it would resolve the issue with the historic designation application as well as the sale of the home for the Kings much earlier if they just sold it as opposed to going through historic designation.
Well, I'm saying that that to the extent that I'm assuming what the Kings are trying to achieve is the sale of the property, that simply this would achieve that goal.
Much faster than going through the historic designation process?
To the extent that it appeared that Anne at least had expressed a willingness and desire to do that more or less immediately, and faster than what it appeared the landmarking decision was going to be made, yes.
Are you finished?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. Looking at the bottom of this page, Bates stamp 203, you see on the bottom left, it appears to say 2 of 3, as if this is page 2 of a 3-page email. Do you see where?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see if you flip over to the very next number within the Bates range, it's 204. It starts with 1 of 1.
Yes.
You see where I'm at?
Yes.
My question is, do you know where page 3 of this email is?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm thinking it is, and in terms of you're asking other questions about.
Can you look and find out if there is a page 3 is what I'm getting at?
Wouldn't surprise. Yeah, I can, and it wouldn't surprise me that it says it's going to Howard.
Okay. If not, do you mind providing a copy of what page 3 is?
No, it would either be that or again. Possible that the quoted text hidden got cut off as well, but
Okay.
yes.
All right. Thank you.
And somebody's going to keep track on what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
I assume you can
Yes.
kind of summarize and give that to me.
Or to your counsel, yes.
I've got it also.
Handing you Exhibit 12. All right, for the record, Exhibit 12 is PB/PTB 197 through 201. Mr. Belmont, do you recognize these documents?
Yes.
I'd like to flip to what is marked as 199. That's the third page in the exhibit. And I'm looking at the second email in this string from you, Peter Belmont, to Ann Dowling, Tuesday, February 12th, 2019, 11:06 a.m. Do you see where I'm at?
Yes.
All right, in this email you say, Ann, give me a call, and then if your phone number is provided, at your convenience, and no problem doing so at night. I'm typically up late. I'm happy to do what I can to help, but I'm not going to formally represent you. In parentheses, I have way too much to do as it is, end parentheses, period. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so in this email you're telling Ann Dowling that you are not going to formally represent her. Is that correct?
In response to her request to retain me.
Okay. And if you didn't formally represent her, did you informally represent her?
I don't believe so. I clearly passed on her message about not objecting to the January commission hearing happening on another date. I don't consider that representing her, and I don't believe I otherwise represented her.
But later on in this email, you state, an example from my observations would be, you said in the last phone call you expected to have a real estate attorney representing you the following week, but sounding like that has not happened yet, period. My experience with Jake, open parenthesis, have not had contact with him previously, close parenthesis, was pretty positive in terms of him being cooperative within the confines of his having a client to represent too, period. Do you see where I read that?
Yes.
Was this just you simply providing some of your observations and some of your advice as to what dealing with Mr. Kramer was like?
As I referenced earlier, Ann had indicated in that joint phone call that she was going to be making an offer and retaining counsel. My recollection was that she had given a time period in that phone call to do so, and that that this message is beyond the time period that Ann had indicated she would be making that offer and retaining counsel. So this is simply kind of, in some ways, trying to point that out to Ann and suggesting that she move forward in whatever fashion she was going to. I don't myself consider that legal advice.
All right, and I'd like to focus on the last page. number 201, and again, we have the quote text hidden issue again at the very bottom, Tuesday, February 12th, 2019, 12:24 p.m. You see where I'm at?
Yes.
Peter Belmont to Ann Dowling.
Yes.
And just for your council's purposes, can you take a look and see if that quoted text that was hidden is responsive to plaintiff's request for production? Is that something you can do?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, I don't have any other questions.
Belmont, Shereen Vesley here representing Ann Dowling. I just have a few questions for you, sir. Mr. Hayden showed you Exhibit 11, and it was the second page, February 13, 10:04 a.m. email between you and Mr. Stitt. You have that in front of you?
Yes.
Counsel asked you about the sentence, quote, "I believe the attorney understands that selling to Ann in the long run is easier than getting bogged down with landmarking issues." Did I read that accurately?
Yes.
Are you indicating that this is what you believe the attorney believes, namely Jay Kramer?
Correct.
Did he indicate to you, in whatever words they may have been, that if the Kings sell to Ann, then there's really no need for legal work and legal fees in relation to a landmark application?
I mean, I don't recall him saying it, in those words.
Sure.
But again, the framework is that I had initiated a discussion with Jake Kramer and suggested there was a possible compromise solution that could be reached to resolve outstanding landmarking issues in the case. And Jake appeared to be very open to that, including sending the price per front linear foot, etc. So that was my impression.
The per linear foot dollar amounts that you're referring to, are you referring to when Jake Kramer was soliciting an offer from Ann Dowling on the King house?
4.
Again, there is a message that Jake sends that I receive setting forth that amount. I don't recall, without looking at that message again, whether it said what it said potentially about Ann. I do recall sending Jake the message subsequent to that saying I have forwarded his message to Ann for Ann to deal with as she saw fit.
That email is in the record.
Correct.
Did Jake Kramer ever tell you that his clients never had any interest in selling to Ann Dowling?
4.
No, to the extent that I read about that in the King depositions, I was again surprised based upon the conversations and communications that I otherwise had with Mr. Kramer.
Did he ever tell you that the Kings would never sell to Ann Dowling under any circumstances?
4.
No, again, just the opposite, to the extent that Ann had indicated some interest in being a potential purchaser. Ultimately, again, there's the potential price that is given for the property, so I never was told otherwise that there was not an interest on behalf of the Kings.
Do you recall Mr. Kramer communicating to Ann or through you that if there was going to be a purchase by Ann Dowling, scratch that, let me restate the question. Do you recall communications between Mr. Kramer and Ann Dowling and/or you, wherein Mr. Kramer is suggesting that Ann Dowling would need to withdraw the landmark application if she were going to negotiate a purchase of the house?
Form.
I know there are communications about would Ann withdraw the application. I believe, although I'm not positive, Jake asked that in the second kind of joint phone call that Ann was a participant in. So I know there were requests, I recall requests being made of Ann about would she withdraw the application.
Do you recall Ms. Dowling refusing to withdraw the landmark application?
Yes.
And of course, going back to this email where you're describing what you believe Mr. Kramer understands, there's no landmark issue to get bogged down with if Ann Dowling removes or withdraws the landmark application, right?
Correct.
And that's exactly what Mr. Kramer was seeking, right?
He, again, made the request for Ms. Dowling to withdraw the application, so that would be consistent with that, yes.
Do you recall Ms. Dowling's desire to continue with efforts to designate the Doc Webb home as historic, regardless of whether she ended up being the owner or somebody else?
I say yes, again, to the extent that Ann never did withdraw the application and that it continued on to hearing even after, again, I'm not party then to those negotiations, even after the letter comes out from Mr. Kramer's complaining about what has been going on regarding the landmark designation.
Were you surprised to see Mr. Kramer characterize Ann Dowling as attempting to exploit the Kings when he all along was negotiating a sale of the King's home to Ann Dowling?
Form.
I was, to the extent that Mr. Kramer had, as I've previously stated, was open to having other offers on the property, including offers by Ms. Dowling.
Did you notice in Mr. Kramer's filings with the city that he ever disclosed that he was in active discussions with Ann Dowling about the notion of selling this house to her?
I don't recall if that's mentioned in that multi-page letter or not. I don't otherwise recall communications of that sort.
To the city?
Correct.
All right. I don't have any further questions.
I have no questions. We'll read.
This concludes the videotape deposition of Peter Belmont. The time is 4:39 p.m.
You'll send me copies.